it doesn't hurt. That's the most terrifying part. When this thing kills you, you don't scream, you don't fight, you don't even know it's happening. You feel warm, you feel calm, you feel a strange kind of happiness, like you just woke up from a beautiful dream. You might even smile. Then you sleep, and you never wake up again. In August 2005, a Boeing 737 took off from Cyprus with 121 people on board. Businessmen, tourists, flight attendants, 2 experienced pilots, and 17 children, flying to their summer vacation. Every single one of them died the same silent, smiling death. The killer was not on the plane. It was not a bomb, not a fire, not a hijacker. The killer was the sky itself. The air around the aircraft, the invisible thing we trust every second of our lives without ever thinking about it. This is the horror of Flight 522, a story where the atmosphere became a murderer, and almost everyone on board never realized they were dying. Today, you'll understand 3 things. First, how the atmosphere, the invisible ocean we live inside, can kill a human being in less than 30 seconds, without leaving a single mark on the body. Second, a small switch inside every passenger aircraft, a switch that, the moment it's left in the wrong position, turns a normal flight into a flying coffin. And third, the story of one young man, only 25 years old, a flight attendant, not a pilot, the only human being still breathing in that aircraft, alone, surrounded by 120 unconscious people for almost 3 hours. He knew he was going to die. He tried to save them anyway. Flight 522 is not just an aviation accident. It's a ghost story. And the ghost is real. It's all around you, even right now. The morning of August 14th, 2005 was calm and bright in Larnaca, Cyprus. At the international airport, passengers were boarding Helios Airways Flight 522. The aircraft was a Boeing 737, only 7 years old, fully inspected, fully fueled, ready for a routine flight to Athens, Greece, and then onward to Prague. On board were 115 passengers, businessmen going to meetings, tourists returning home, families beginning their holidays. Among them, 17 children. 6 crew members prepared the cabin. The captain was an experienced pilot with nearly 17,000 flying hours. The first officer had trained in Germany. The flight attendants had performed this same route many times. Nothing about this morning felt unusual. Nothing suggested danger. At 9:07 a.m., Flight 522 lifted off the runway. The climb was smooth. The sky was clear. For the first few minutes, everything was perfect. But something was very wrong with this aircraft, and no one on board knew. The plane had already been quietly killed, the night before, by a mistake that took less than 3 seconds to make. To understand what happened next, we first have to understand a strange, uncomfortable truth about the world you live in. The air around you is not what you think it is. Right now, you are breathing something. You can't see it, you can't taste it, but it's entering your body, feeding your blood, keeping your brain alive. If it stopped, you'd lose consciousness within minutes. If it disappeared, you'd be dead within seconds. That something is the atmosphere. It's an invisible ocean wrapped around the Earth, and at sea level, where you probably are right now, it has weight. It presses down on you from every direction. This pressure is what forces oxygen into your lungs, from your lungs into your blood, from your blood into your brain. Without this pressure, the oxygen is useless. Now here's the part that almost everyone gets wrong. Most people believe that at high altitudes there's less oxygen, but that's not true. At 34,000 feet, the air still contains the same percentage of oxygen as it does on the ground. The oxygen is there, it's all around the plane. The problem? There isn't enough pressure to push it into your body. Your lungs can still breathe, your heart can still beat, but the oxygen cannot enter your blood. and your brain begins to starve. Scientists call this hypoxia, and hypoxia is one of the most deceptive killers in the world. Because unlike drowning, unlike fire, unlike injury, your body has no alarm system for it. Instead, your body lies to you. You feel warm, you feel light, your thoughts drift, you may laugh, you may feel a deep sense of peace. Some pilots who have trained for this in pressure chambers say the feeling is almost enjoyable, like being gently pulled into a dream. But inside your skull, your brain is dying. Cells are shutting down, judgment is collapsing, and you can't feel any of it. At 34,000 feet, scientists have measured exactly how long a human being can still think clearly before the lights go out. The answer is chilling. 15 to 30 seconds. That's roughly the same time it takes a passenger to help a child put on an oxygen mask. This is exactly why every safety briefing in the world tells you the same thing. Put your own mask on first, before helping anyone else. Because you don't have time for both. On Flight 522, that time ran out for every person on board, all at once. To understand what happened next, we first have to understand a strange, uncomfortable truth about the world you live in. The air around you is not what you think it is. Right now, you are breathing something. You can't see it, you can't taste it, but it's entering your body, feeding your blood, keeping your brain alive. If it stopped, you'd lose consciousness within minutes. If it disappeared, you'd be dead within seconds. That something is the atmosphere. It's an invisible ocean wrapped around the Earth. And at sea level, where you probably are right now, it has weight. It presses down on you from every direction. This pressure is what forces oxygen into your lungs, from your lungs into your blood, from your blood into your brain. Without this pressure, the oxygen is useless. Now here's the part that almost everyone gets wrong. Most people believe that at high altitudes, there's less oxygen. But that's not true. At 34,000 feet, the air still contains the same percentage of oxygen as it does on the ground. The oxygen is there, it's all around the plane. The problem? There isn't enough pressure to push it into your body. Your lungs can still breathe, your heart can still beat, but the oxygen cannot enter your blood, and your brain begins to starve. Scientists call this hypoxia, and hypoxia is one of the most deceptive killers in the world. Because unlike drowning, unlike fire, unlike injury, your body has no alarm system for it. Instead, your body lies to you. You feel warm, you feel light, your thoughts drift. You may laugh, you may feel a deep sense of peace. Some pilots who have trained for this in pressure chambers say the feeling is almost enjoyable, like being gently pulled into a dream. But inside your skull, your brain is dying. Cells are shutting down, judgment is collapsing, and you can't feel any of it. At 34,000 feet, scientists have measured exactly how long a human being can still think clearly before the lights go out. The answer is chilling. 15 to 30 seconds. That's roughly the same time it takes a passenger to help a child put on an oxygen mask. This is exactly why every safety briefing in the world tells you the same thing. Put your own mask on first, before helping anyone else. Because you don't have time for both. On Flight 522, that time ran out for every person on board, all at once. Inside the cockpit of every Boeing 737, there's a small panel above the pilots' heads. On this panel is a switch. It isn't impressive, it doesn't look dangerous, it has only 3 positions written in simple letters: auto, manual, off. This switch controls whether the plane keeps you alive. In auto mode, the normal setting, a computer manages the cabin pressure automatically. As the aircraft climbs, the system pumps air into the cabin and carefully releases just enough to maintain a safe, breathable environment inside. You sit in your seat, you drink your coffee, you read your book, you never notice anything. The computer is breathing for the entire plane. In manual mode, the computer is switched off. The pilots must control the cabin pressure themselves, turning dials by hand as the altitude changes. This mode exists for a reason. It's used by engineers on the ground to test whether the pressurization system is working correctly before each flight. It's also a backup. In case the automatic system ever fails during a flight, the pilots can take over and manage the pressure manually. In off mode, there's no pressurization at all. This setting is only used on the ground. The rule is simple. Before every takeoff, the switch must be in auto. On the night of August 13, 2005, a ground engineer was performing a routine test on the Boeing 737 that would become Flight 522. To run the test, he flipped the switch from auto to manual. The system was checked. Everything worked perfectly. Then he did one thing wrong. He forgot to flip the switch back to auto. The next morning, the pilots arrived. They began the pre-flight checklist, a long list of items they must verify before every flight. The pressurization switch is on that checklist. It's item number 7. Somehow, neither pilot noticed. This isn't unusual in aviation. The human eye, when checking a familiar panel for the 1000th time, often sees what it expects to see, not what is actually there. The pilots expected the switch to be in auto, so when they looked at it, that's what they saw. At 9:07 a.m., Flight 522 took off. The aircraft was climbing into the sky. The pressurization system was not working. And the cabin, slowly, invisibly, was beginning to turn into the thin, deadly air of high altitude. As Flight 522 climbed past 12,000 feet, an alarm began to sound in the cockpit, a sharp, repeating horn. This was the cabin altitude warning. It was the aircraft screaming as loudly as it could that the cabin was not pressurized, that the people inside were in mortal danger. But here's the most tragic part of this entire story. On the Boeing 737, the cabin altitude warning sounded exactly the same as another warning, the takeoff configuration warning. This second warning only happens on the ground, when the plane isn't set up correctly for takeoff. The two warnings were identical. Same tone, same rhythm, same sound. And there was no warning light, only the sound. The pilot could not look at a panel and see clearly what the aircraft was trying to tell him. He could only listen and guess. The pilots of Flight 522, now climbing past 14,000 feet, heard the horn. But they were in the air, so in their minds, it could not be the takeoff warning. They believed the system was malfunctioning, a false alarm. They contacted the company's ground engineer by radio. They asked for help in identifying the sound. The engineer was confused. He suggested they check a circuit breaker. The conversation became disorganized, and while they were talking, hypoxia was already entering their brains. By 18,000 feet, the oxygen masks in the passenger cabin dropped automatically from the ceiling. Across the aircraft, passengers pulled the masks down and strapped them on, just as the safety card had shown them. They waited. They expected the plane to begin descending to a safer altitude, which is what any trained pilot would do in this emergency. But Flight 522 did not descend. It kept climbing. What the passengers didn't know is that the emergency oxygen masks in a passenger cabin are not designed to last a long flight. They contain only 12 to 15 minutes of oxygen. They're a bridge, a lifeline, meant to keep people alive while the pilots bring the plane down to breathable air. If the pilots never descend, the oxygen simply runs out. And then the passengers, one by one, begin to lose consciousness. Inside the cockpit, the pilots had never put on their own oxygen masks. The hypoxia had already clouded their thinking. They couldn't recognize the warning. They couldn't recognize their own symptoms. They felt warm. They felt calm. By 28,000 feet, the first officer slumped forward. By 30,000 feet, the captain lost consciousness. The aircraft reached its programmed cruising altitude, 34,000 feet, and leveled off. Inside, 121 people were sliding into silence. For the next 2 hours and 40 minutes, Flight 522 flew itself. The autopilot had been programmed to fly to Athens, so it did. The aircraft traveled across the Aegean Sea, through clear skies, without a single living hand on the controls. When it reached Athens airport, the autopilot, as programmed, entered a holding pattern. It began flying in slow, wide circles above the city. Below, Athens air traffic control was trying to make contact. Once, twice, 10 times. Silence. Controllers tried every radio frequency. They asked other aircraft in the area to relay messages. They contacted the company in Cyprus. Nothing worked. Flight 522 was now completely out of contact. The controllers watched in growing fear as the aircraft circled Athens like a lost ghost, visible on every radar screen, but completely unreachable. At 11:24 a.m., the Greek government made a decision it had never made before in peacetime. The Hellenic Air Force was ordered to launch fighter aircraft. 2 F-16 jets took off at high speed, climbing hard to intercept the silent airliner. They weren't sent to attack it, they were sent to look inside it. The fighters caught up with Flight 522 as it continued its quiet circles over Athens. One of the F-16 moved closer, very close, wing to wing, with a Boeing 737 full of people. The fighter pilot lifted his visor. He looked through the cockpit window of Flight 522, and then he saw something no military pilot had ever been trained to see. The captain's seat was empty. The first officer was slumped forward, motionless, against the controls. Oxygen masks were hanging uselessly in the cabin behind him. Passengers were visible in the windows, heads leaning to the side, bodies still, unmoving. It looked like a flying tomb. The F-16 pilot reported what he was seeing to Athens. His voice was steady, but his words were not. He said there was no sign of life. He said the aircraft appeared to be flying itself. And then, suddenly, something moved. A figure appeared in the cockpit, a man, alive, wearing an oxygen mask. He walked slowly into the captain's position and sat down. The fighter pilot stared in disbelief. Somehow, one person on Flight 522 was still conscious. His name was Andreas Prodromou. He was 25 years old. He wasn't a pilot, he was a flight attendant. But Andreas wasn't an ordinary flight attendant. In his personal life, he had studied flying. He held a private pilot's license. He understood, in a basic way, how an aircraft worked, although he had never been trained on the complex systems of a Boeing 737. And he had done one thing that saved him. While everyone else slept, every commercial aircraft carries portable oxygen cylinders, small green bottles stored in the galleys for emergencies. They're meant for the cabin crew to use when they must move through the aircraft during a decompression event. Unlike the masks that drop from the ceiling, which only last a few minutes, these portable bottles contain enough oxygen for about 2 hours. Somewhere in those early minutes of the flight, as the air thinned and the passengers put on their masks, Andreas reached for one of these cylinders. He strapped the mask to his face, and he stayed alive. For 2 hours and 40 minutes, Andreas moved through an aircraft full of unconscious people. We don't know exactly what he did during that time. The flight recorders didn't capture the cabin. He couldn't use the radio from his position among the passengers. Perhaps he tried to wake people. Perhaps he checked on the children. Perhaps he sat in silence, listening to the steady hiss of oxygen from his cylinder, knowing it was running out. What we do know is this. At some point, Andreas made a decision. He walked to the cockpit. He saw the captain's seat, empty. He saw the first officer, unconscious. He saw the Aegean Sea passing beneath the windows in slow, silent circles. And he sat down, in the captain's chair. He was the last living human being on Flight 522, and he tried to save them all. At 11:49 a.m., after almost 3 hours of silence, a human voice came through the radio in Athens. Mayday, Mayday, Helios Airways Flight 522. It was Andreas. Athens replied immediately, but Andreas didn't have a headset properly connected. He was speaking into the radio, but he couldn't hear the responses. He didn't know the right frequencies. He was alone, in a cockpit he didn't fully understand, trying to talk to a world that was desperately trying to talk back. And now, the aircraft was running out of time. At 12 p.m., the left engine flamed out. The fuel was finished. A minute later, the right engine died. Flight 522 began to fall. With the engines silent, Andreas could do nothing. The aircraft descended uncontrollably, gliding down through the clear Greek sky. At 12:04 p.m., Flight 522 crashed into a hillside near the small village of Grammatiko, about 40 kilometers north of Athens. All 121 people on board were killed. 17 of them were children. When rescue teams reached the wreckage, they searched for survivors. They found none. But they did find Andreas Prodromou, The 25-year-old flight attendant who had spent the final hours of his life trying to save strangers, still strapped into the captain's seat. The investigation took nearly 2 years. Investigators concluded that Flight 522 wasn't brought down by weather, or by terrorism, or by mechanical failure. It was brought down by a chain of small, human mistakes. A ground engineer who forgot to flip a switch, 2 pilots who didn't notice it on the checklist, a warning horn that sounded identical to a different alarm, and a crew that didn't recognize the silent, smiling symptoms of hypoxia as they drifted into unconsciousness. Helios Airways went bankrupt within a year. Several of its executives were charged. The accident changed global aviation. Boeing made critical modifications to the 737. The cabin altitude warning was redesigned so that it no longer sounded identical to the takeoff configuration alarm. And for the first time, a visible warning light was added to the cockpit, a dedicated cabin altitude light, so that pilots would never again have to guess what the aircraft was trying to tell them. Before Flight 522, there was only a sound. After Flight 522, there was a light. That light exists today because 121 people died in silence. Pilot training was updated worldwide. Crews now spend time inside pressure chambers so they can personally experience the warmth, the euphoria, the dangerous calm of hypoxia, and learn to recognize it before it's too late. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The same switch, auto, manual, off, still exists. It's still on the overhead panel of every Boeing 737 flying in the world today. It's still possible for a human being to leave it in the wrong position, and similar events have happened since. In 1999, a private jet carrying American golfer Payne Stewart flew on autopilot for more than 4 hours with its passengers unconscious. When fighter pilots intercepted the aircraft, they reported something chilling. The windows of the jet were frosted over. From the cold of the high-altitude air inside the cabin, everyone inside had frozen into silence. The aircraft eventually ran out of fuel and crashed in South Dakota. The only thing standing between safety and silence, between life and a quiet death in the sky, is the attention of people on the ground. And people, sometimes, make mistakes. Flight 522 teaches us something the world doesn't like to admit. The most dangerous things in existence aren't always loud. They don't always roar. They don't always burn. Sometimes, the most powerful killers are silent, invisible, already inside you, already touching your skin, already filling your lungs. The atmosphere kept 121 people alive their entire lives, until one switch, one altitude, one forgotten moment turned the very air around them into the thing that killed them. It's still around you, right now. You are breathing it. There are more stories like this. Stories where the forces that sustain us, quietly, invisibly, become the forces that destroy us. Stories that science cannot fully explain, and history would rather forget. If you want to see the next one, subscribe, because the truth is stranger than you think, and it's closer than you believe.